I guess this is something that would be nice for the show anyway, because me and Adam have talked about it a lot. But back in 2021 on Christmas Day, this guy 2020, my bad.
Yeah.
Outfitted his van in downtown Nashville to read like an emergency countdown. He was inside and it blew up like a whole block pretty much on 2nd Avenue. There were, various theories. People thought he was targeting the ATT building, the big Batman building. That's kind of Nashville's signature. But there were other, people coming forward saying he was crazy into some kind of weird reptilian-based belief system and had some mental health issues. But then it kind of just... like they didn't really explore it, and I feel like we never got an answer, right? Adam, you feel the same way?
Yeah. Well, yeah, go ahead and record on your end too.
Oh crap.
Yeah. Well, there's been things that have come out. I mean, I don't think that they have a definitive idea of what exactly, unless there were some writings or something, which I don't know about, but there was a woman that he was hanging out with that was like the sister of his ex-girlfriend. And I guess that they were involved with, I don't know if they were involved with each other or, or whether they were just friends. Well, exactly that's kind of nebulous.
Right.
And she, he just kind of would drop these hints about meeting up with this woman that was a reptilian out in the woods, and that the reptilians were coming, and that, it pretty much, since we're talking about the book, we can segue the book into this, Robert, because you talk about They Live. I mean, it was very They Live-esque. Yeah. And in fact, when it happened, it reminded me of They Live, because at the end of They Live, they take that, spoiler alert, they take that thing out, right, and it reveals the aliens. And what he had bombed was this it was like an AT&T hub that was in downtown Nashville that not very many people knew was actually there, but he knew because he had worked on it, and I think his dad had worked for AT&T or something. But anyway, she warned the police that he was working on, he had stuff that he was working on in the back in his van. The Metro Nashville police went there. This is about a year or so before it happened in 2019, I think.
Knocked and talked to him for a second and left.
Yeah, right. And he said, yeah, and I guess that they had the police had the impression that she was this crazy ex-girlfriend that was trying to tell lies about him, and they actually got her to go to they wanted her to go to counseling, and she was like, no, this guy's planning something, and they didn't listen to her, and then he blew it up. But he purposely didn't he put a countdown, and
I think a few people got injured
on a loudspeaker to tell people to get out, and people did. I think there was a couple of injuries, but it wasn't from the explosion.
Then it played Downtown, the song Downtown.
Yeah, they played the Petula Clark song Downtown. Yeah.
And then it exploded.
Yeah. And then it exploded.
With him inside.
With him inside of it. So he committed suicide, and I guess he took out the reptilians or something.
But we didn't get a whole lot, so conspiracy-minded folks are really right. What is this? Was this some kind of strike against big internet corporations, or was a reptilian story just a cover to discredit him? But an FBI agent recently, I believe, or a TBI agent, I don't remember, disclosed a bunch of information about it, and this guy really was deep into this reptilian belief system, and was making devices for seeing them and all kinds of shit.
Yeah. No, it was weird. It was weird. And
Oh, interesting. So where was that reported? There's recent
Um,
news.
I think that was
I saw it in
pretty
local
recent,
news,
right?
so yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
in Nashville. Yeah.
I saw local and like the Tennessean and stuff, so it's probably just a Google search away. But I don't know if it made too much national because the
Yeah,
story kind of gone by the wayside.
I have several thoughts about that, and that is I noted that story. I mentioned it in Operation Mindfuck, and I first of all, it's just incredible, particularly since it did occur in 2020. That at that time period, I remember thinking, if this had happened in 1994, it would have subsumed like a year's worth of headlines.
Yeah,
Yeah, and instead, it was just a blip, and it was gone in a week, and everybody
Right.
forgot about it.
Right.
And
It
I
was
thought
major
that's, I
news.
mean,
It was major national news that day, and we're a
that
couple of
day,
days later.
well,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it knocked out communication systems like
it did.
from Nashville down to Atlanta. So I was
Right.
without phone coverage or internet for a good couple
Hmm.
weeks.
He knew what to hit. He knew what to hit to cause a disruption.
And I also remember thinking that it's similar to the Georgia Guidestones in the sense that this major thing happens, everybody forgets about it. There doesn't seem to be a follow-up. And I also remember speculating at the time that just as you compared it to the fictional narrative of They Live, that, did this guy and did the people who blew up the Georgia Guidestones, did they think that once they blew up the Guidestones, that reality was going to shimmer and then they were going to be able to see all the reptilians? Um, I,
I think maybe that like the reason this guy took himself out in Nashville, I think that I don't know what the Georgia guy says because I think that was something that political candidate had. She had something to do with it. That Candace Taylor,
right.
like I think with this guy in Nashville, I think he might have actually thought that he was like exposing something.
Do we know
Or exposing the presence.
this woman that he supposedly referred to? Do we know that she exists, or was this
But
just
he said that she was a reptilian and that she came to him in the woods at night and shit
Yeah.
like that.
And he was kind of trying to brag on this lady, I think, like, oh, I don't need you. I got all these fine
Right,
reptilian
right.
broads.
Right. Yeah.
wow?
Yeah.
She could be like the woman in the polka dot dress in the Sirhan
Yeah.
Yeah.
RFK
Right.
assassination.
Right.
Maybe she was a real person, but we just don't know,
Well,
who she
there was
was.
weird. There was weird things that I heard. But like, cause like it still was a big story here for a few months, and even when I came back to Nashville, like in the spring, like it was still a big story, and like apparently he had left like his whatever life savings he had to some girl in L.A.
Oh yeah. Forgot
Nobody
about that.
knows
There's all
anything
kinds
who
of weird.
that is or was or like was she
There's
a
still some
friend?
unknowns.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns that like about this guy. But he just seemed to me, he just seemed to be like just like this loner guy in his 50s that probably,
He had technical
have you seen
intelligence, but
it's like have you seen the movie this is the movie Serfiel turned me on to Eddington or the Ari Aster movie?
Oh,
Have you seen this?
that's my favorite film of 2025.
Yeah, yeah. This guy, I almost feel like that right there was what happened to this guy just over this long period of time. And maybe the
Right.
pandemic just accelerated it.
Yes. Yes. Interesting. Yeah, and of course that happened to a lot of people. And but by the way, in terms of the thin line between fantasy and reality, breaking down for a lot of people. Just today, I saw a headline in Forbes, but it was published on January 4th. The headline reads, "Cop transforms into frog, according to AI-generated police report." And so, speaking of reptilian shifting, I guess the police are now using artificial intelligence to write their police reports. That can't go wrong. And
Oh
so,
yeah,
as it,
that's comforting. isn't it?
As it was writing the report, I guess the cops were watching Princess and the Frog in the background, and it began to summarize the movie. And so it said that the cop transformed into a frog in the middle of the official police report, and they had the cops had to explain why it was claiming that there was this reptilian shape-shifting cop on the police force. This was in Forbes. It's not like the Weekly World News or the Onion.
A lawyer could have really took advantage of that.
Oh, absolutely. I would be shocked if they didn't. I mean, I'd be very upset if I was the client. I mean, whoever got arrested during this situation. Before we started recording, I mentioned that in 1996 in Seattle, a guy drove up to City Hall in Washington with a truck with a giant replica of a human heart. And in French, it read, "This is not a bomb." And I was sort of marveling at the Discordian prankster quality of that. But that was in 1996. I wonder what the reaction would be in 2026 if you pulled something like that. I think that whoever that performance artist was who pulled that prank probably would be in a much more difficult situation now than back in 1996.
I would say in 2006 they would have been in a much more difficult situation, right? Because
I
mean, it was a different country pre 9/11.
Sure.
You could probably get away with shit like that.
Right. Surfail, I wanted to ask you. I heard your interview on Steve Berg's podcast where you were talking about Bob Brewer and Warren Gettler. Which I read that book when it came out. In fact, I read it under its original title, Shadow of the Sentinel. Yeah. Which I always considered to be a more evocative title. I preferred the original title, but when it came out in paperback, they changed it to Rebel Gold, which is like more literal. I think the paperback publisher probably thought, well, probably didn't sell well on hardcover. Let's try Rebel Gold. Maybe that'll help. But I was very impressed by that book when I read it back in 2003. And in fact, I remember around that time, I was newly initiated into the Blue Lodge in Torrance, and they asked me for some reason, they came to me and asked me to write like a top 20 recommended reading list for incoming initiates. And on the top 20 list, I included Shadow of the Sentinel because I like the fact that it came at the subject of Freemasonry out of left field, But I was very interested in the fact that you mentioned that you had sent a lecture by Warren Gettler to Steve Berg, and I would very much like to see that.
Yeah, he did one at a treasure hunter convention gathering I went to in Utah. They do every year. So it's on YouTube. I'll share it with you. It's on Terry Carter's page. He's kind of the guy we talked about being this kind of modern YouTube folklorist for all the old timers who are still around. Gettler did his. I met them. Met Bob. That was really special. And saw
you actually interacted with Bob Brewer?
Yeah, you met him? And I purchased one of the first editions he had left in a box of Shadow of the Sentinel, and him and Gettler signed it. But I saw a lecture that was not recorded because Bob didn't want to. He's probably putting the material together in some kind of presentation that he'll sell. But I saw a presentation by Bob about his kind of master theory continuation of what's in Rebel Gold into the Superstition Mountains, and it was and the Lou map. If you've heard of the Lou map, like he's brought it all together now into Bob Brewer's master theory, and it was quite the experience.
You mentioned when you were on. Yeah. Oh yeah, continue.
No, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned when you were on Steve Berg's podcast that when you saw Bob Brewer's lecture that it suddenly you suddenly realize that he was like the James Shelby Downard of treasure hunters. And I wondered, what did he say that made you have that thought?
Well, I thought that would just when I read Shadow of the Sentinel for the first time,
Sure.
because it's synchromystic. I mean, the way he approaches his investigation, the way he uses this kind of non-linear symbolic pattern finding way of getting to what he says was finding real stuff. It just totally, and it has to do with so much of the mystical toponymy stuff with the maps and the survey system and the idea of symbology of the latitude, longitude, and USGS topographical maps and all that stuff. And I was like, wow, this is probably what Downard was adjacent to also, especially in the places he was: Florida, Arizona, the Southwest, around Victoria Peak. Like, I think treasure hunting really influenced Downard. But yeah, Bob Brewer is like a total synchromystic, though. It's the way he puts things together. It's like, wow, it's like being there, watching Downard spin one of his raps.
I'm kind of, because one of the things that got me into Freemasonry to the point of actually joining Freemasonry was the fact that I was studying literature and I'm reading these books from the 1890s, early 1900s, and I'm seeing Masonic Hermetic symbolism popping up in all these disparate books, and hadn't really seen a lot of people analyzing that aspect of it. So I was kind of, when in this lecture, did he ever make any allusions to literary symbolism connected to these maps, like Wizard of Oz or Peter Pan or like Alice in Wonderland, mythology, anything like that connected to the way he tracks down these treasures? Did he ever make any like literary allusions?
I'd really have to think about it. I have some notes somewhere I'd have to look at.
Yeah.
Nothing that really pops out, but
Right.
Freemasonic symbolism and his interpretations of it and what he says were interpretations of it handed down to him by his ancestors was a very, very large part of it. I mean, he even, I don't really know how deep he is into it, but he even like referenced Memphis and Mizraim and all kinds of stuff. It gets real
interesting.
Yeah.
Did he? For people who don't know, the Memphis and Mizraim is Mizraim, I believe, is a Hebrew name for Egypt, and the Rite of Memphis was founded in like the 1830s in France, and then the Rite of Mizraim was founded in early 1800s in Italy, and then they merged together in like the 1880s in Naples. And it's a clandestine lodge referred to as Egyptian Freemasonry, and it has like 96 degrees. But it's very much a clandestine lodge. It's not recognized as an actual lodge. However, it does, it has roots going back to the 1800s. Some people claim it's connected to, the Templars, of course. In what way was
everything's connected to the Templars? Right?
Yeah, the Nashville bombing is connected to the Templars.
Yes, it probably is. It may be.
In what way was he? Did he bring that into it?
There was some symbolism or something he thought was symbolic, and he said that's from the Rite of Memphis Mizraim, the M&M Masons, and they go back to the Knights Templar, and it's like just not super deep into it. In the same way, I think maybe Downard was was deep into occultism in the way that he understood it, but he's definitely autodidact and understands esoteric things in his own way that aren't necessarily what Freemasons or people really deep into occult practice would necessarily say. But
Sure.
Is the 96th degree where you get the phallic throne? Is that where you finally get to sit on the phallic throne?
I have no idea.
Well, of course, there's speaking of Pike's phallic throne, which I think is referred to in Treason in America, the Lyndon LaRouche, not written by
nice. Is it really? Lyndon LaRouche wrote about the phallic throne. Interesting.
Well, actually, it's not LaRouche, but it's one of those guys who writes. LaRouche published the book.
He had a whole
Treason in
operation.
America. Yeah, I can't remember who the writer is of Treason in America.
I got you.
He references the Pike's phallic throne in there, which I still don't know. I mean, you could ask AI, generate a phallic throne for me, because I want to know what that looks like. But I think it's interesting that in terms of when was this conference that you went to? Was this like in the summer or?
Yeah, it was in August in Duchesne, Utah. It's called the Moon Lake Gathering.
Does this happen every year?
Yes. And it had been just at like public parks and things like that. This was the first year that they did it within a large like a convention center, I guess, for a rural convention center with like, I mean, the big presentations were like in the middle of a rodeo floor, I guess, like on the stage. And yeah, it was pretty down home and Mormon.
I found a book in I was in Ventura, and there's a wonderful little bookstore there called the Calico Cat Bookshop, and they had a huge esoteric section, and I found this old book, first edition hardcover, 1930, called Coronado's Children: Lost Mines and Buried Treasures of the Southwest, by J. Frank Dobie. Oh, you have it? Yep. In the back, there's a chapter called Shadows and Symbols. And so you see the symbols, and of course, one of them is the turtle, which, and that's referenced by Warren Gettler and Bob Brewer as being one of the Knights of the Golden Circle symbols, but of course, in this book, he never references Freemasonry, never references Knights of the Golden Circle, and yet he's commenting on the symbolism, which I thought was interesting. And then it ends with him talking about like using divining rods, switches. He talks about mercury, bringing mercury in a bottle, and that'll like lead you to the treasure. And he talks about an old esoteric book called the 6th and 7th Book of Moses.
Yep.
And that can help you out.
That's part of powwow tradition. That's what that is. The 6th and 7th Book of Moses. That's what that is. Yeah.
And
it has occult methods of treasure hunting from Europe.
Yeah. That's all. That's it. So that's in there. Some treasure hunting.
And he even mentions using dreams as a tool to hunt down the treasure. So I just think it's interesting. Right. There's always been this kind of synchronistic connection. Like, I mean, this book was published in 1930. And then in the 20s, Harold T. Wilkins, who wrote one of my favorite 1950s UFO books, Flying Saucers on the Attack, and also the follow-up, Flying Saucers Uncensored, back in the 20s, Harold T. Wilkins wrote like 8 or 9 books about treasure hunting. And there's one in particular I recommend, Hunting Hidden Treasures, which was published by E.P. Dutton in 1929. And in that book, Wilkins, he goes into the hidden hell window, which sounds like it's about some sort of portal, but actually it's literally a window that depicts hell. And it was taken out of the church to protect it from the Puritans and buried in this field somewhere. So they talk about, uncovering this elaborate stained glass window of hell and then returning it to where it was supposed to be in the church that was still there, I guess. And he talks about like the buried treasure of Samuel Pepys and hunt for Bacon, Shakespeare treasures. It goes on and on. So it's just interesting that Wilkins was really into treasure hunting. And then in the 50s, he shifts into ufology as if there's some sort of like connection between those two things.
Well, they're all adjacent, this is all just like it's the, the folkish, like Earth Mysteries part of America, it's like it all blends together, and they had people talking about Bigfoot and UFOs there at the conference, and it's all,
That's fascinating. I mean, in a way, like the Richard Shaver people in the 40s, they were kind of treasure hunters. I mean, they're going around spelunking. But instead of finding treasure, they were looking for the doorway, the hidden portals to the underground.
I mean, I was telling Sergio when he was telling me about him getting into all this stuff that like there is a real, from my just kind of outsider's perspective on it, just there's a real search for the Holy Grail aspect to it. Like it's alchemical in nature. It's like this treasure that you're looking for is really, I guess, the treasure within yourself kind of thing. Like it has that, it's more, the quest is more important than the actually ever finding anything.
Right. Which is that is the point of the Maltese Falcon, the original novel and the Houston film, of course. I mean, in there, it's direct references to the Knights of Malta and they're looking for this treasure. And at the end of the movie, at the end of the book, it's really about the search. They're extremely excited that they haven't found it yet. And almost it would be disappointing if they found it, because that would mean the search is over. I even think in terms of like modern ufology or conspiracy theory or parapolitical research. I mean, whenever you're doing a FOIA request, it's a kind of treasure hunt, isn't it? And I mean, in my first book, in Cryptoschatology, I did a FOIA request on Bishop James Pike because he was friends with Phil Dick. And I thought, well, all these people have done FOIA requests on Phil Dick and they didn't find much of anything except letters that Phil Dick wrote to the FBI saying, "Are you following me?" So I thought, I wonder if I did a FOIA request on Bishop Pike, I might find out something about Phil Dick because they were hanging out together at the same time, doing seances, trying to contact Bishop Pike's son who had died. And actually, the FBI sent me this stack of papers. They had been spying on Bishop James Pike because he was against the Vietnam War and he was the Episcopal bishop, so he had some influence. So they were watching him, and some of the papers that were blacked out and removed from the file in interest of national security corresponded with the same exact time period that he was hanging out with Phil Dick, which I thought was interesting. But one of the documents was an FBI agent had placed the announcement of Bishop Pike's death in the file. So it was just a photocopy of like the obituary, and some FBI agent had written in hand over it, "Good riddance!" exclamation points. And I thought, Jesus.
Wow.
And but I remember, and I included it it's in Cryptoschatology. You can see the page, and it's in the chapter about science fiction. And because I was covering Phil Dick, and I remember thinking, I had this thought like, oh, I'm probably the only one who has this document. I mean, so it's kind of like this moment of like, oh, I found the treasure. So people who are doing like FOIA requests are almost on a kind of treasure hunt as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yes, good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance.
Yeah, there it is. I've always been fascinated by that Wild West period, which really, even though we associate it with like B movies and pulp novels, it really extends into the early 1900s. And like Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is probably one of the best novels of the past 50 years, but it's essentially a Western. And filled with like Gnostic and Masonic symbolism and all that. And in fact, near here where I am in Long Beach, there used to be an amusement park called the Pike. And back in the 1970s, they were shooting an episode of The $6 Million Man. And in the Tunnel of Love ride, they found a corpse that they didn't know was a corpse. They thought it was a dummy, but it turned out to be an actual mummified human being, a guy named Elmer McCurdy, who was a gunfighter in Oklahoma back in the early 1900s. And he'd been killed by the police during a shootout. And they sold his body to a local carnival guy. And so you could pay money to go and throw rocks at Elmer McCurdy. I mean, that was the amusement. You would pay to get some rocks, and then you would throw it at the corpse of this gunfighter.
It was a time.
It was make America great again. Let's go back to the days where we could throw rocks at corpses and nobody cared. So apparently what happened was when the Pike Amusement Park opened in the 20s or 30s, they bought a bunch of old amusement park equipment from other amusement parks all around the country. And so they bought Elmer McCurdy's corpse thinking it was a dummy, and they put it in the Tunnel of Love. So it would pop out and scare you as you're, rowing by in a little boat. And oddly enough, I later discovered that the artist who created Masters of the Universe, He-Man, they based Skeletor's look on a photograph of Elmer McCurdy, of his body when they found it. They took it out of the Long Beach amusement park. And then later on, there's a DC character called Jonah Hex, who's a gunfighter. And when they ended his comic in the 80s, the last story, which was by Michael Fleischer, they had Jonah Hex get killed and his body stuffed and ended up in an amusement park. So obviously the writer had read the story about Elmer McCurdy, but I guess we're going far afield from treasure hunting. But it is interesting, the connections amongst the Old West and Freemasonry and Hermeticism and all this stuff, because these things are not often connected together, and yet. As I said, in the 1890s and early 1900s, that's when a lot of this sort of Masonic, Hermetic-related literature was being published. So that was a ripe time for that kind of esotericism.
Yeah.
It's been quite the journey. I've been really happy to really recognize all of those elements from the paranormal, the occult, and conspiracy theory in treasure hunting. And so it just all fits together, and it's a little more fun, a little more innocent in certain ways. Having a lot of fun, but I'm just a baby treasure hunter, of course.
Yeah, and of course it overlaps with, like, the Knights of the Golden Circle then leads you to Albert Pike and all this other stuff, which I quoted from Gettler and Brewer's book in Cryptoschatology in the chapter on Pike. That's very interesting. I'd very much like to. So you're saying the Bob Brewer lecture was not recorded?
No, so it was very secure, and his people around him were making sure no one was using their cell phones or anything.
He's like, I got a secret I got to tell now, y'all.
Well, the thing is, he felt like he got ripped off a lot. The way that the treasure hunting world works, and like his original templates, back in the day got out, and then people were profiting off of those, these like map overlays that help you find multiple caches supposedly. And, then his instructional videos and pamphlets and things like that he produced were just bootlegged notoriously. So I think at this point, and he feels like he's been burned, quite a few times just in partnerships with treasure hunters, as happens. So I think he wants to, make a DVD or something and have some kind of paywall, or make sure he gets paid. He deserves it.
I see. Yeah. I have to say, I do remember around about, I think, 2005, I went with my friend Randy Kopang, who is a ufologist. He wrote a book called Camouflage Through Limited Disclosure. We went to the movies to see National Treasure, the Nicolas Cage movie. And I remember turning to my friend Randy and saying, I think they ripped off Warren Gettler and Bob Brewer.
Yeah, Gettler likes to mention that.
Well, there are distinct similarities, between book and film. So at the very least, it might have been inspired by it, Yeah,
it's interesting. They're interesting. They made an interesting pair of very different people. Him and Gettler.
Yes. Yeah. The odd couple, definitely.
Let's we got you on, Robert. We first of all, I want to thank you for encouraging me to come back and starting things back up again. Not that long ago, but a few months ago, you contacted me about that. So thank you for the encouragement. I'm kind of just slowly getting my feet back in the water on this. So, but we're going to talk about Hollywood. I want to talk a little bit about Hollywood Haunts the World. I mean, this is a book that you've been talking about for a while, and you got it released, I guess, like last year now in 2025. And
so it came out November 6th, I believe.
Yeah. So, what's the purpose? What, kind of like, this is like I guess a compendium of different writings that you've done, but like, what's the purpose of like, kind of what's the theme of Hollywood Haunts the World?
Well, I started writing it, I think, in 2009, and while working on other things. I mean, like Chameleon, I wrote in the summer of 2010, pretty quickly, even though, I had compiled a lot of notes and research on it without even realizing I was writing a book. So Chameleon was written very quickly. Hollywood Haunts the World, I was working on it off and on, publishing the chapters sort of in parts. Some of the chapters had never been seen before. Some originally appeared in different form in Video Watchdog magazine and New York Review of Science Fiction and New Dawn and other places. But each time I wrote a chapter, I knew it was going to be part of a larger book. And I knew I wanted to write about the topic of taboos and how fiction has always been the most effective way to deal with societal taboos in a way that won't get the creators like arrested or killed. And film has been the most popular venue for fiction for almost 100 years or more. And this book covers 100 years of cinema from 1921 to 2021. But though it goes backwards chronologically, I think the most recent film covered is Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley, and then you go back to 1921 to The Phantom Carriage, Victor Sjöström's The Phantom Carriage. And I deal with a number of different topics that could not be discussed in polite society, but were examined in the context of popular films.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's 9 chapters in the book, and each chapter is a different topic. And so, I just mentioned a film, National Treasure, which isn't covered in the book, but there's an example of a film that's talking about this other topic we've been discussing, the hermetic symbolism and masonry and treasure hunting and all that, and going to the roots of the Civil War and the aftermath of that, encoded in this adventure film, Mm-hmm. In I think the first chapter I wrote was the one about Darwinian horror. And it's called The Suppressed Science of Dr. Miracle. And the main film I focused on is Murders in the Rue Morgue, the Robert Florey film from the early 30s, 1932, which is the film that Bela Lugosi did right after Dracula. And originally, Bela Lugosi was supposed to play Frankenstein, the Dr. Frankenstein, in the film that Robert Florey would have directed. But supposedly, Lugosi objected to appearing because Universal didn't want Lugosi to play the Doctor. They wanted him to play the monster.
Yeah.
And Lugosi was very upset about having to play a role that was non-speaking. And because the James Whale Frankenstein is so embedded in our consciousness, we think of the monster as a non-speaking character. But if you read the original book, he talks and talks and talks through the whole damn book. Very talkative character in the original Frankenstein.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff in Frankenstein. Mary Shelley, who was 18 when she wrote it, she grew up sitting on the lap of William Blake. Her father wrote a book called Lies of the Necromancers. Her father, William Godwin, is credited as having written the first mystery novel, and having written the first anarchist manifesto. And her mother, who died soon after she was born, is credited as having written the first feminist manifesto.
Mary Wollstonecraft, yeah,
right. And of course, she runs away when she's a teenager with a married man Percy Shelley. And Percy Shelley was also very much interested in the occult, and that was something that he had in common with her father, William Godwin. And it's interesting that in the original Frankenstein, which is set in 17 dash dash, we don't know exactly what year the story is set in, but she has Victor going off as a college student to the University of Bavaria, which of course is the same place where Adam Weishaupt began the Illuminati. And when he gets there, he meets two professors. One professor is very much the kind of the skeptic who believes in modern science and studying galvanism and electricity and things like that. And the other professor encourages Victor's interest in the old occult sciences and Hermeticism and alchemy. And so you get the sense that Victor is combining these two strains, the cutting edge science of the time of galvanism and electricity, and melding that with the ancient art of alchemy. So it's interesting that Mary Shelley chooses the University of Bavaria for the beginning of her story. I mean, I think that's not a coincidence. I should think she does that on purpose. And because she's nebulous as to when it's taking place, 17 dash dash, it could very well be, the exact time period when Weishaupt is forming the Illuminati at that exact location. So stop. Exactly. And in the early days of Hollywood, it was actually a kind of unwritten taboo even to depict the supernatural in film. That's why in the 1920s, in the silent films that are made, like The Bat, Phantom of the Opera, etc., if there's anything that seems to be supernatural, it ends up not being supernatural, because the common wisdom among the gatekeepers at the studios was that American audiences would not accept depictions of the supernatural in film. It just wouldn't fly, wouldn't make money, was not a good idea. So it was Carl Lumbly Jr. at Universal who really pushed Dracula and was apparently a fan of this type of fiction, and was the guy at the studio who pushed that through. And of course, Dracula ends up being this huge hit. And that's where that's the first, real depiction of the supernatural in American cinema. And so that blows open the door. And then we get Murders in the Rue Morgue, which really follows in a tradition of what I call the Darwinian horror movie. These stories in which there's some genetic connection between man and ape, and it's almost always shown in the context of metaphor, and usually in the form of a horror film or a kind of nascent science fiction film, like in Island of Lost Souls, which is also with Lugosi, Earl Kenton film, which inspired Devo, by the way. Devo said that it was watching Island of Lost Souls late at night at like 3 a.m. where they came up with the idea of de-evolution and forming a band around this idea.
Is that that's based off Island of Dr. Moreau? Is that
right? Yes, my favorite adaptation of Island of Dr. Moreau. Though, however, I have to say the later version from the 90s with Marlon Brando actually weaves in Jose Delgado implants into the storyline, if you recall. That was an interesting addition to the storyline, directed by John Frankenheimer, who directed The Manchurian Candidate in the 60s.
Supposed to have been directed by Richard Stanley.
Exactly, and they fired him. And then there's that wonderful documentary where he actually dressed up as one of the mutants and sneaked back onto the set. It's called Hearts of Darkness.
It's called Lost Soul. Hearts of Darkness is the one about Apocalypse Now. Yeah,
that's right. I'm getting the two confused. That's interesting. And of course, he recently directed an adaptation of The Color Out of Space with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, he did. He did.
But in Murders of the Rue Morgue, Bela Lugosi, he's a scientist. He's trying to prove the theory of evolution through these illicit experiments on apes and female prostitutes. And it's a pretty salacious plot that is, I think, unofficially based on H.P. Lovecraft's The White Ape, which is a story that was first published in 21 and then later reprinted in Weird Tales in 1924. And because, the film adaptation of Murders at the Rue Morgue has only the barest connection to the original short story by Poe. So I think they're adding in elements from Lovecraft unofficially into the screenplay, which was co-written by a very young John Huston, by the way, which is interesting as well. But in the original script, it's all about mating these women with apes, because he's trying to prove the connection between the two. That was too far, even for pre-code Hollywood. So he changes it to saying that he's mixing the blood of these prostitutes that he's captured. He's mixing the blood with the apes. There's a lot of interbreeding in these guerrilla horror films of the 20s and 30s. Mm-hmm. The Lon Chaney's A Blind Bargain from 1922, which is a lost film that has a similar plot. I just learned that Crispin Glover did a remake of it just like recently, which I haven't seen.
That's gonna be weird.
But I'm sure that it is. Remind me later on to tell you that the time I met Crispin Glover and had him sign an L. Ron Hubbard book to me. But that remind me to tell you that. But there's also The Wizard from 27, which is an adaptation of a book called Balaloo by Gaston Leroux, who wrote Phantom of the Opera. Island of Lost Souls, I've already mentioned. Kurt Siodmak wrote a film called The Ape, starring Boris Karloff. On and on. Captive Wild Woman from the 1940s with John Carradine. You just get this. It's just one film after another, connecting apes with human beings, and that they're connected. Now, keep in mind that at this time you could not teach the theory of evolution in some areas of the United States all the way into the early 60s.
Right. Not in this state.
In fact, it may have extended into the late 60s.
Right. I mean, I'm over here sitting in Tennessee. That's where the Scopes monkey trial was. So yeah,
that's right. And of course, that happens in 1925. And despite the fact that the Scopes monkey trial happens in 25, it's still this taboo topic. You could not make a movie in 1926 that just openly advocated the theory of evolution. And so the pattern that I show in the book is you have to encode these taboo topics usually in genre form, a horror movie, science fiction. There's a whole chapter about Westerns. And you have to use some sort of genre that's sort of considered not legitimate, where people aren't really looking at it too closely. And then eventually you'll have a film like Inherit the Wind in 1960, which was directed by Stanley Kramer and stars Spencer Tracy and Frederick March, both of whom played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Frederick March played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the Ruben Mamoulian version in the 30s. Spencer Tracy played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the Victor Fleming version in the 40s, both playing the character as this kind of bestial ape-like creature, which isn't really necessarily an aspect of the original Robert Louis Stevenson novella. In the original novella, it's implied that it's a psychological transformation. He looks human in either form, but in the films, they make him look like this half ape, half human creature. So I think that when Stanley Kramer cast Spencer Tracy and Frederick March in Inherit the Wind, which is a kind of docudrama about the Scopes monkey trial, and Tracy and March are playing adversaries, attorneys, adjudicating this trial. I think that was on purpose. It's the casting of those actors, these two actors associated with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in Inherit the Wind, is on purpose. It's almost like Robert W. Sullivan talks about occult casting, where you cast an actor who you associate with some other role, and then subliminally the audience will connect that actor with this other previous role. So in the Scopes monkey trial, this film, Inherit the Wind, it's almost like a docudrama. There's no metaphor. It's not science fiction. It's not horror. It's just a realistic film about the Scopes monkey trial. So the taboo topic is now sort of out in the open. It's not a taboo anymore. And so that whole subgenre of Darwinian horror kind of fades away, and you don't really get that anymore. You get occasional throwbacks, like something like Trog or you know, Planet of the Apes, which is really more about a metaphor for the civil rights era at that time than about Darwinian evolution. But so I trace this pattern amongst other topics as well, where you get the thing encoded and you get the taboo encoded in metaphorical form until finally the topic is just written about in naked, almost like a documentary style. And then at that point, it's not taboo anymore, so you don't need to hide it anymore.
I'd like to explore that a little more with you. Go ahead and finish your thought first, though. Sorry.
No. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know, in all these like speculative subcultures and conspiracy theory, especially, film has really become more and more important in ideas about, you know, predictive programming, or as you mentioned, you know, Hoffman/Downard's revelation of the method idea, things like this, that the elites use film to introduce concepts and transform society, or just abuse us in certain ways. But your analysis of exploring these like occulted taboos, as you call them, is a lot more nuanced, and it leaves room for the art itself. And even though there is, you know, strange connections between a lot of this stuff, there has been government and intelligence, military involvement in film. It is not this like master plan medium, you know, that's used in this like one-dimensional way somehow by a group of people to, you know, control and indoctrinate society. I think I really appreciate it, because there's so much of this of the other stuff, and it's getting even more popular, and a lot of times it doesn't leave room for art. You know, it's like the artist becomes just this, you know, is just a conduit to, you know, some nefarious plan, instead of someone trying to explore ideas that they may not think is taboo, but, you know, and things are almost like, even though some things aren't supposed to necessarily be taboo anymore, it's like they're reintroduced as taboo, you know, from these like really weird kind of fundamentalist frameworks that go even, you know, that spread to people who aren't even fundamentalists. And so I really like the book because it has a real nuanced, interesting way of looking at these films and the genre in general.
That's all extremely well said, and there's a lot to unpack there, because I mean, obviously I have an intense interest in James Shelby Downard and in Michael Hoffman. Yeah. And I even Michael Hoffman and I exchanged 2 letters back in 2000. I remember telling Joan D'Arc, the editor of Paranoia magazine, I go, "Hey, I wrote Michael Hoffman a letter. He wrote me back." She goes, "He wrote you back?" She told me the story about, I can't remember if she was at the party or if she had heard it from somebody else, but that Adam Parfrey had thrown a party and Michael Hoffman was at the party.
I've heard this one.
And Adam Parfrey had some sort of poster of, like, it was a close-up, extreme close-up of a snake.
Yeah.
And then Michael Hoffman went up to it and he said, "The true face of the Jew."
Yeah, I think Parfrey wrote about it, and he said that he was there, that Hoffman was there with his son and pointed it to his son. And said,
yes, that was the element. Yes, that's the element I forgot. I remember her telling me that she turned to his son. Makes it even worse. He turned to his son and said this. He had written some sort of pamphlet that was about, like, I can't remember what the title of it was, but it was like 3 Masonic assassinations. and it covered supposedly the assassination of Edgar Allan Poe, Joseph Smith, and William Morgan.
Yeah.
And I wrote him a letter and I said, I can follow the logic of the William Morgan chapter. I follow the logic of the Joseph Smith chapter, but I'm really having a hard time with this Poe one. Right. So the theory was the Cask of Amontillado, classic story by Poe. There are Masonic references in there, and it does seem that Poe is satirizing Freemasonry to some extent. He mentions the trial. At one point, the guy who's about to get killed, who's a really arrogant son of a bitch, the narrator who is going to kill the other guy, the narrator says, I'm a member of the Brotherhood. And then the other guy, the arrogant guy, says, "Oh, what's the sign?" And then the narrator pulls out a trowel, and then the other guy goes, "Bullshit, you're not a member," And then that guy ends up getting bricked up behind masonry, and is killed. And so it could be that Poe is having a bit of fun here, though also Poe, who was more well known in his lifetime, not as a poet or as a short story writer, but as a book reviewer. He was known as he was kind of like a trash talker, reviewer. Like people would read the reviews to see how was he going to insult somebody today. Right. But he wrote a glowing review. So he very rarely wrote positive reviews, but he wrote a very glowing review of the poetry of Albert Pike. So I guess he wasn't that much of a trash talker when it came to Freemasonry. It's just he was praising Albert Pike's poetry. So Michael Hoffman uses all this kind of tortured logic to try to get us to believe that Poe was murdered by the Freemasons because of the Cask of Amontillado, and so I was questioning some of his scholarship in this essay. This is back in 2000, and I told him that I was teaching at CSU Long Beach, which actually wasn't quite true yet. I had not yet started teaching at CSU Long Beach. I thought he would take me more seriously if I said that, though. So I said I'm teaching at CSU Long Beach, and my colleagues are really questioning this point. I thought it'd be better if I said my colleagues were doing this rather than it was me.
You're peer reviewing Hoffman.
And he wrote me this screed back going, "I don't care what your colleagues in academia think about me," and then went on for like a page and a half or something. And I told Joan Diarc this, the editor of Paranoia, and she was like gobsmacked that I got a response at all. But the whole concept of the revelation of the method, right? Mm-hmm. I hear people like quoting it, and I'm really interested in the utilitarian aspects of this. Like, how does it all work exactly? So the idea is that, occultists, they're making these movies to kind of rub in the faces of the populace what is being done to them. And then everyone goes to see the movie. And then afterwards, I guess like all the occultists who made the movie, they get together in the lodge room and they go, tee. Yeah. we pulled one off on them. We made them buy a ticket. And then is that it? I mean, what exactly, how does this work?
His occult theory is that Hoffman's is that by witnessing something like that or some kind of work that's employing revelation of the method, you are giving some kind of implicit consent, and it's like a contract. It's like an occult contract that you're giving your consent, maybe even on a subconscious level, that then allows whatever to take place, whether it's something physical or just like the spell itself.
Right.
And what's interesting about that is that because Hoffman places himself as obviously an anti-occultist, anti-masonry, but that idea, if he thinks that works, that is an occult idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that means that he believes in the occult. He thinks the occult works.
He does. That's the only way. He just thinks it's, most of that is evil. It's in his latest book, he actually does kind of, he admits that in doing this analysis that, are they in fact, playing into it even more and spreading these occult workings for the powers that be even more, and desensitizing people to the stuff even more, and basically participating in the revelation of the method themselves, because that's what they're doing, is revealing these methods, right? So it gets really meta, and he goes into it for quite a while.
Well, and it's interesting how there's because I see a lot of this kind of speculation, right? And some people pick up on it without even knowing who Michael Hoffman is.
Right. Well, it's totally dispersed into the culture now, so that
right.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of ignorance of how Hollywood works and also how artists work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's almost like if you're analyzing the films entirely through that tunnel of revelation of the method, it's kind of a blind alley. It's like each analysis just ends at the same point, and it doesn't go past that point.
Well, you know what I mean by they're creating taboos where the taboos didn't really exist, and that okay, what is so strange about an artist using, say, mythological, classic Greco-Roman mythological symbolism? There's nothing strange about that. That's been going on for thousands of years in Western culture, right? So, but it is it's tabooed in that, it's a pagan thing, and this is occultist, and when it's really just part of art, just total tropes of art.
Well, it's also interesting how Hoffman kind of paradoxically and simultaneously elevates his influence and also downplays it at the same time. This is what I mean by that. He claimed that the reason the glasses in They Live are called Hoffman lenses is because they're named after Michael Hoffman. When obviously it's clear that John Carpenter is a fan of psychoactive chemicals, particularly if you see Ghost of Mars, which I think is an excellent film that deserves more recognition. Hardly anyone talks about Ghost of Mars, but it is absolutely a pro psychedelic film. So I think it's obvious that the Hoffman lenses are named after Albert Hoffman. You put the lenses on, and now you see naked reality, right? The idea that it's named after Michael Hoffman is pretty laughable. However, at the same time, for some reason, they don't stop to consider who's reading this stuff. And I think I was on Where Did the Road Go? I think it was that, or maybe it was another podcast where they had put up a photo of me I'm wearing a bright blue Spy versus Spy t-shirt, and I'm holding Camellia over one eye. And somebody in the comments wrote, "What's up with the one eye symbolism?" Right? And of course, the real answer is, I've seen the same stupid memes that you've seen, and I'm purposely mimicking it. There's nothing mysterious.
Right.
They never stop to consider that the people who are making the movies are reading the same things you're reading, and they're listening to the same podcast that you're listening to. And I know, when I went on the WTF podcast to talk about Operation Mindfuck, so Mark Maron does the show out of his house. So I go up to his door. There's a placemat that says WTF in front of the door. Ring the bell. Mark Maron opens the door, and under his arm is a first edition copy of Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare by Michael Hoffman. I know it's a first edition because I immediately tell it's white. First edition is white. Second is red. The third is black. And he's got the white copy of the Hoffman book and also the first edition of Apocalypse Culture. Those are the two books he has under his arm. I turn to my friend Jim. I go, he comes to the door with Michael Hoffman's Secret Societies of Psychological Warfare and Apocalypse Culture. Like, I go, that's impressive. Like, obviously, I didn't know how deeply he was into conspiracy theories, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So we go into the garage. Yeah, he goes, sit down, and there's a little red chair you sit down in. And I felt like I was invading William Burroughs' like the reality studio. Like, I sit down in a little red chair, and he sits down. He's got his copy of Apocalypse Culture is just like torn apart. Like he's read it 1 billion times. And then he starts telling me how when he discovered King Kill 33rd Degree back in like the late 80s, it spun him out because he was already like doing drugs and he reads this thing.
I've seen that happen to some folks.
Well, yeah, he's seeing like Kabbalistic symbols and buildings and things. And of course I read it too, though it didn't, it didn't spin me out like it did to Mark Maron. But the point is, you never know who's reading this stuff. Like I didn't, when I went there, I didn't think that, I didn't think he was as deeply into conspiracy theories as it turned out that he was. So you never know who's reading Hoffman, who's listening to the same podcast you're listening to. I mean, I remember David Jones, who's the editor of New Dawn magazine. He said, he asked me once, he goes, most of our subscribers, are in Southern California. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
And I go, it's because Hollywood producers are reading the conspiracy theories in your magazine and they're ripping them off because you can't copyright a conspiracy theory. Right. So that's how you get.
There's so much fodder now for.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
writers. There's so much fodder.
I mean, like going back crazy. To Mel Gibson, whose father was an anti-Mason and wrote anti-Masonic books. Mel Gibson did conspiracy theory, back in the 90s, that film. And it's clear in the film they use one of Dave Emery's theories, which was Dave Emery had a theory that he had noticed a pattern that every time the space shuttle went up, there was some major earthquake somewhere. So Dave Emery was implying that they were using some sort of orbital technology to create earthquakes from the space shuttle. Well, if you recall in the movie, that's the theory that ends up being true. That's the one that he kind of like accidentally hit on, and then why they start like surveilling him or whatever. And in fact, he even like wears this little like cab driver's hat, which I've seen Dave Emery. Actually went to a Dave Emery lecture and like he was wearing this cab driver's hat and like with a toothpick in his mouth, and Mel Gibson's got the same thing. So they clearly like based him on like Dave Emery, or I just mentioned National Treasure or, but for some reason among the people who speculate these things, it doesn't occur to them that we're all in the same information well. They're not like, they don't really have special access to anything that you don't have access to. Yeah. They're just deciding to use it in their art, Well,
like I think what Hoffman's discovering and is something that is like true to my experience is that the greatest introduction to the occult now is conspiracy theory and its presentation of anti-occult material.
Right. It's an entry. It's
like the biggest.
It's a gateway drug.
Interesting that you could say that because I remember having a conversation with a guy at a Masonic lodge in Long Beach. It was at the Desmoulins Society. And there was a guy there who was in his 20s, and I was at the time in my 30s. And the guy told me the way he got into Freemasonry, why he joined, was he read Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution by Stephen Knight, which led him to From Hell, which led him to Michael Hoffman, which led him to, and right. So in fact, I read an essay online by a guy who's the master of the lodge, I think in Canada. I can't remember exactly. I would have to go find the article, but it was the master of the lodge writing the essay on the Masonic website, and he said what got him into Freemasonry was all the anti-Masonic stuff.
Yeah.
and in other words, it's not like he joined thinking, oh, I'm going to join and then I'm going to get into like Eyes Wide Shut or something like that.
some of these people, some of these conspiracy theorists, they if they're really look into the conspiracy, and they know more than probably like a run of the mill Mason might know. You know what I mean?
That is true.
Yeah.
When I joined the Blue Lodge in Torrance, the guy asked me because they, you go in, you ask for an application, give them the application fee. They're talking to you. They'll send 3 people out to go interview people who, for example, if you're married and you want to join, and they'll go interview your wife, and they'll say, do you have a problem with him joining the Freemasons? If she says, I do have a problem with that, they'll just back away. They won't even let you join. So I'm being interviewed by this guy, and the guy says, what's your interest? And I said, well, I'm in graduate school, MFA program at CSU Long Beach. I'm studying literature, and I've noticed this Hermetic Masonic symbolism in these writers, and I mentioned a whole slew of writers. And I said, I want to understand the symbolism more. And there was like a bit of silence. And I go, is that a good reason? And then he goes, oh, it's not a bad reason. I've never heard that reason before, Mm-hmm. And then I started mentioning, I go, I've read books by Manly P. Hall and C.W. Leadbeater and Albert Mackey, and I went through like all these writers, and he stops and he goes, aside from Albert Pike, I'm not familiar with any of the people you just mentioned. And in that particular Blue Lodge, there was a one door that said library, and I go, can I go in the library? He goes, oh, not yet. And, later you go in the library. And so I went to the first degree, and afterwards I was like, can I go in the library? They're like, no, not yet. And then I went to the second degree. I go, can I go in the library? They're like, nope. Then I went to the third degree. I go, can I go in the library? They're like, yes, you can go in the library. I'm like, okay. And then they opened the door, and I thought it was going to be like a golden light was going to come through. And I enter, and there's this one little shelf with like 18 copies of Morals and Dogma and a lot of other like old issues of the Scottish Rite Journal and some other. And my library at home is like 10,000 times better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised that about Manly P. Hall. That surprises me a little bit because, when I went to it was the House of the Temple, the 33rd degree, main for the whole country in DC. When I went there in like 2012, they had the big hardcover edition of like, not Morals and Dogma, but Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Right.
So
well,
that surprises me.
It depends on where you're going, because not all the lodges are the same. And so, for example, in Culver City, the Fauché Lodge, which is the lodge where my late friend and colleague Walter Boart joined the Freemasons, though he never got past the first degree because he had a hard time memorizing the archaic prose poetry that you have to memorize. And Walter Boart asked them if he could translate it into like hip hop prose, into like hip hop poetry, hip hop lyrics, so he could memorize it. And they were like, no, you can't do that. But the Fauché Lodge, like I've gone there several times. It's not far from the Museum of Jurassic Technology. If you're ever in Southern California, definitely visit the Museum of Jurassic Technology. It's the crown jewel of Southern California Museum.
The Museum of Jurassic Technology?
Yes, Jurassic Technology. What do you think is in the Museum of Jurassic Technology? You want to guess?
I mean, we're talking about time of the dinosaurs. Is there a bunch of fossils? Like, I don't, is this more of a geological thing?
That is an excellent guess. Couldn't be farther from the truth. But it's a good guess based on the name. It's if you go in, there's a book called Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonder, and it's all about David Wilson is the guy who created the Museum of Jurassic Technology. In fact, he won the MacArthur Foundation Award for the museum. And you go in, and it's the ultimate in creative nonfiction. It took me a while when I went in there the first time to figure out what the hell was going on. I go to this one exhibit, and it talks about this scientist, and there's a photo of the scientist on the wall, and I realized that the scientist they're talking about, I go, wait a minute, that's a photograph of Charles Fort in front of that weird checkerboard game that he made. I don't know if you've read biographies of Charles Fort. He invented this game that was called Super Checkers. It was exactly like checkers, except the squares were smaller and there were more pieces. But anyway, there's this photograph of him sitting in front of the Super Checkers board, and this photograph is on the wall, but it identifies him as this scientist. I realized, oh, I see. None of this is real. But actually, that's not quite the case. The exhibits are like this weird mixture of fiction and reality, and you kind of have to go into the museum and try to separate like what is what, you know. So near the Museum of Drastic Technology, not far away, is the Fauché Lodge in Culver City, and this is kind of like the other end of the spectrum. I went in there, and that's Stephen Heller, who I interviewed, the bishop of the Gnostic Church in LA. He was just sitting in the audience, just listening to the lecture. The lectures they put on are like really intense, you know, going into the history of Freemasonry and occultism. And there are some lodges that are specialty lodges, like say there are lodges that are just magicians, just stage magicians. or if you're interested in science fiction, there's like the science fiction writer Masonic Lodge, you know, like you can create a specialty lodge, you know. So it really depends on where you are and what lodge you go to. But I remember talking to my friend Randy, the one who I went to go see National Treasure with, and I was remarking at the time when I had first joined, I said, I'm kind of amazed that they haven't read Manly P. Hall, or, you know. And one of the guys who was one of the higher ups on the lodge, I became friendly with him, and I gave him a copy of The Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall, and he read it, and he came back to me. He goes, "That's the most amazing book I've ever read." You know, he'd been a Mason for like 15 years at that point or something. I said to my friend Randy, I go, I'm kind of amazed that they're not really familiar with these writers. And Randy said something interesting. He said, well, he goes, are they dedicated to the rituals? I said, yes, they're very dedicated to the rituals. Like, they want to do it. They do not want any misstep. It has to be done exactly the way it's supposed to be done. And they're very dedicated to it. And Randy said, if they're doing the rituals correctly, they don't need to know. They don't need to know the history and the background to it, as long as they're doing everything correctly. And I thought that's interesting. And these guys, they really are like dedicated to it. But if you get it up to like the Scottish Rite, like when I joined the Scottish Rite in Long Beach, they have a library there on the second floor. And at the time I was researching cryptoschatology, and you could only be in the library as long as the librarian was there. They wouldn't let you be there by yourself. So the librarian would have to come in from wherever he lived, like in Irvine, and come down and be there with you while you were looking at the books. And I did this several times, but I only had 2 hours or something to write notes down. And I said to the guy, I go, I'd really like to have more time here. Is there any way that I could just be here by myself? And the guy goes, well, the librarian, he said, that's kind of like against the rules. He goes, but he goes, how about this? I'll make you the assistant librarian, and then I'll give you a key, and then you can come and be here as long as you want. I go, okay. So suddenly I was the official assistant librarian. So I would go in with a key, and the women down below who ran the lodge, they say hello to me every day. Like at 8:30 in the morning, I'd come in, and they would close at 3:30. And I had access to the library. All I had to do is, if someone came in, I just had to show them where the books were or everything. So I did that for several weeks while I was researching, and I used some of that research in cryptoschatology. So the librarian there, he told me a story which kind of ties in to everything we've been talking about. A director who you would know, who's famous for doing UFO films. I won't mention his name, but he has a film coming out this summer that has the word disclosure in it. So you can figure out from that who that might be. This famous Hollywood director calls the lodge, wants to talk to the librarian. So the librarian, the guy who gave me the assistant librarian role, the director wanted him to go out to his, not his house, but his studio in Burbank, for the express purpose of looking at his vast collection of Masonic books, and wanted the guy to tell him what he was missing. And so, and I realized, like, he, obviously the director wasn't a Mason himself, otherwise he wouldn't need the Masonic librarian to come by and tell him what he was missing,
Quite an interloper there.
So what that is to me, what that says to me, is it's similar to when George Lucas, when Star Wars comes out, it's a huge hit, and George Lucas in interviews mentions that, well, he read Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, and so suddenly all these screenwriters are like, that's it, that's the secret sauce. Yep. If we just use the hero's journey, it'll be a huge hit. So of course, that hero's journey archetype, I mean, that appears in King Kong, and the people who made King Kong never read Joseph Campbell, because Joseph Campbell was a kid when King Kong was made. Yeah. But they didn't know anything about that. They just wrote a story, and it happened to align with this, pattern.
I mean, a lot of this stuff is pretty much genetic almost, or it's just the building blocks of storytelling. It's just there already.
It works when it works. When it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I mean, the hero's journey, you can apply that to Willow, but that was not as successful as Star Wars, right? So you see the symbolism used in films, and I really do think the attitude is like, this is the secret sauce. Like, if we get these mythological or archetypal symbols, we use them correctly, it'll somehow have a kind of subliminal effect, on the audience in a way.
I mean, it definitely did. I mean, that was like, Star Wars was the beginning of like I think Jaws was somewhat too, but like the beginning of the blockbuster. Like, you had to have the summer blockbuster. Like, that was really the beginning of it,
Right. And I have noticed that it is interesting, for example, the various films that Warner Brothers put out using the DC superhero characters, they just kept striking out, with each one, but then they made Aquaman, and that was, I think, the most financially successful of those DC superhero movies. And it's interesting, you can see like the Royal Arch degree symbolism in that movie. And that was probably like the most financially successful DC superhero film that they did. So maybe there is some truth to this in some way.
I'm going to ask you, Robert.
Yeah.
I want to ask about, we still have time, about one of the chapters in the book. You talk about Jack Parsons, and you talk about Twin Peaks, and like the link, and like, you're one of the first that I've heard that's kind of like put those two things together. Because I recently, like last year or the year before last, actually now, I finally watched like all of Twin Peaks, like, the first, second seasons, and then the.
Oh, wait a minute! You'd never seen it before?
I'd never seen it before. Yeah, before, a couple years ago. Yeah, basically. And part of that was the reason why I did that was because Sergio, lives not too far from where they filmed it. So
sure.
Yeah, I kicked his ass, and I was like, you have to watch all of it before you come here. Then we'll go to.
Yeah, right. I watched the first season before I came.
North Bend.
Yeah.
So you've now seen all 3 seasons.
I've seen all 3 seasons. Yes.
And Fire Walk with Me.
I've seen Fire Walk with Me. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's interesting. There's a certain point in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the series was not readily available, but the film was. So I had a friend of mine. I got into her car, and she put on the Fire Walk with Me soundtrack in the car. This would have been like 2002, and I go, I go, oh, this is my favorite film soundtrack, or Fire Walk with Me. I go, have you seen Twin Peaks? She said, no, I've seen Fire Walk with Me. I go, so you've only seen the film. You haven't seen the series at all. She goes, no. I go, interesting. Tell me if you were going to explain the plot of Fire Walk with Me to someone who's never seen it before, how would you describe it? And she said, well, it's about this teenage girl who's being sexually abused by her father, and she can't handle that. So she creates this other character, this Bob character, to cover the fact that she's being molested by her father. I go, so your interpretation is that Bob does not exist as a separate character in the film. It's just like a psychological projection. She said, yes. So I thought that was interesting because, of course, I mean, that metaphorical level is there, obviously, but in the context of the series, it's a living metaphor. In other words, in the context of the reality of Twin Peaks, Bob is a living, sentient being separate from
correct.
Leland. I just thought it was interesting that someone who had never seen the series but had only seen the film interpreted it entirely as a psychological conditioned, situation. But I saw the series when it first came out. I was 18 at the time, so I was kind of like the age of the characters in the, I was the age of essentially, I think Laura's 17 and her and all of her friends are 17. So I was like 18 at the time, and I was in my last year of high school. So it was 1990, spring of 1990, and at that time, now with the internet, when a project is happening, you hear about it like 4 years before. In this case, I remember my mom coming into my room and she said, that director you like is doing a TV series. I go, what director? She goes, David Lynch. I go, what? And I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. I could not imagine what a David Lynch television series could be, or that it could even exist. And my memory is it was like 2 weeks later, and then it was on. And I remember watching it, distinct memories of watching it as it aired for the first time with my older brother, and Damien, who I wrote about in Camellia, was there watching it with me. And I remember a friend calling me like during a commercial break, like right after the scene where Sarah is on the phone with Leland, and there is no spoken communication among these characters. It's as if there is a kind of telepathic link. No one has said, Laura has been murdered, but you see simultaneous at the high school, at the hotel where Leland's on the phone, at the Palmer residence where Sarah's on the phone, that they're all realizing at the same time, like, what has occurred. It's like thoughts through space. And Sarah starts screaming, and then she keeps screaming. And I had to explain to my daughter, because when you have kids, you introduce them to what you're interested in. So you never know what they're going to get interested in, though. So I try to get her interested in Star Wars. No interest, zero interest in Star Wars. She had no interest in any of the Marvel superhero films that came out in the past, 15 years. But Twin Peaks, she went right for that. She dressed up as Laura Palmer for Halloween, last Halloween, and the Christmas before David Lynch died, she made a gingerbread house of the Red Room, and she used licorice sticks to be the curtains.
Interesting.
And then she used the black and white chocolate chips to represent the zigzag pattern on the floor, and then she had the gingerbread man dressed as Dale Cooper sitting in the chair. And so she got really into it. And in fact, she was stunned by the fact that David Lynch died on her birthday, January 15th, which is also that's the day that Black Dahlia died as well, which Lynch was really into.
Let's put a pin in the Black Dahlia thing for a second. Let's put a pin there. We'll come back to that.
Sure.
But well, what's the link with Parsons though? What's the
okay. So of course,
Jack Parsons,
Jack Parsons, who I would consider to be like the hidden ground of 1940s, 1950s Southern California history, because it definitely would be a taboo topic if in the 1950s you try to make a movie about how the foundations of this American space program were built on someone who was into ceremonial magic, and that had helped him create the rocket fuel that got us to the moon. That's not something that you would do a TV show about or a film, or even though his escapades were being written about in local newspapers in Southern California, that's not something that any studio would have greenlit as a film, right? And he's made like several kind of high profile pop culture appearances recently, but he's still not, a household name. In fact, my wife's stepdad, his father, who recently passed away at the age of 101, I went to his 100th birthday party, and I talked to him, and he, very lucid, despite the fact that he was 100 years old at the time. He was involved in the early years of the space program and eventually became vice president of Rocketdyne. And he wrote a memoir about all those years called I'll Push, You Steer. And I asked him about Jack Parsons, and he had no idea who I was talking about. and you might say it's because, well, he's 100 years old, but no. I mean, he had very good memory. And
they were probably pretty compartmentalized from each other. I mean, that might have been what absolutely. It was. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so even though Parsons, created the rocket fuel that got us to the moon, he's still an obscure figure. But in the 40s and 50s, when Parsons was still alive, he exerted a tremendous influence, particularly in science fiction. And in 1942, Anthony Boucher, who was the first editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, he wrote a novel called Rocket to the Morgue, in which the main character is based on Parsons. And in 1960, Phil Dick wrote a novel called Dr. Futurity. And again, the main character was based on Parsons. And a teenage Ray Bradbury first met Parsons in the late 1930s. And Bradbury, he had such an impact on Bradbury that Bradbury was still talking about it, not long before he died in 2012. And he was interviewed by George Pendle, who wrote the biography Strange Angel about Parsons. And Bradbury talked about what a tremendous impact Parsons had on him when he saw him lecture at LOSFA, the Los Angeles Science Fiction League, on May 1st, 1938. And so Bradbury would have been 18, just out of high school. And Parsons would have been about 6 or 7 years older than Bradbury at that point. But Bradbury was captivated by this, dashing young Howard Hughes type who was a scientist who was talking about all the nutty stuff that Bradbury dreamed about, going into outer space, going to the moon. And Bradbury even spoke with Parsons right after the lecture. And he was like intimidated by Parsons because Parsons was this great scientist. And Bradbury was just this newsboy who was not going to college and didn't intend on going to college. And he had no way of joining Caltech. But of course, Bradbury, he couldn't have known that Parsons, he had no credentials himself. He had never gone to college. He just had the know-how, and it was kind of like the Wild West. The space program was the Wild West. No one, it hadn't become institutionalized. So someone like Parsons could walk in, and if he had the know-how, he could initiate himself into this burgeoning space program. So it's clear that this encounter with Parsons had an impact on Bradbury because he remembered it vividly when talking to Pendle a few years before Bradbury's death. And when Parsons died, some people say he didn't die, but supposedly he blew up on June 17th, 1952. That would have been around the same time that Bradbury began writing his first screenplay, It Came from Outer Space. And it seems to me that Parsons' death would have had some impact on Bradbury. So it's my theory that the main character of It Came from Outer Space, John Putnam, JP, was inspired by Jack Parsons.
Interesting.
And It Came from Outer Space. It has several cinematic firsts. It's the first film to feature the scientist as the hero. So JP, John Putnam, is this kind of handsome young man, rugged. He's not a glasses-wearing, milksop, he's not a raving lunatic like Bela Lugosi, like a Bela Lugosi scientist or a Karloff scientist that Bradbury would have grown up on. Putnam is described in the film as an outsider, a man who thinks for himself. He believes in aliens from outer space, beings that can shapeshift and travel through telephone wires like electricity and take on the form of human beings, doppelgangers. The aliens, and they came from outer space, behave more like elementals, like the kind of interdimensional spirits that Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were trying to summon in 46. And in the screenplay, the aliens, they're not called aliens, they're called xenomorphs, which is a word later appropriated by the Alien franchise, right? Xeno means strange, and morph means, from elsewhere, or because they can transform into non-physical states of being. And so there are a lot of similarities between Bradbury's xenomorphs and the creatures that inhabit the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks. And It Came from Outer Space also introduces the science fiction movie with the desert setting, where the desert almost stands in for the alien landscape. And that same environment is later, you see that in like Tarantula, Them, the Beasts of Yucca Flats, and then later on, in Tremors, and films like that. So, why did Bradbury use that kind of an environment in It Came from Outer Space? Parsons claimed to have met a spiritual being in the Mojave Desert that he called a Venusian. And this is when he's performing all these complex magic rituals with Hubbard. The science fiction community in Southern California is very small at this time, and Parsons is friends with science fiction writers like Hubbard, Jack Williamson, who wrote Darker Than You Think, which is a novel that really inspired Parsons, Boucher, who I already mentioned, Robert Heinlein, and supposedly the character in A Stranger in a Strange Land, which influenced Charles Manson, has a lot of similarities to Parsons. Forrest J. Ackerman, who was Bradbury's first literary agent. So it's not hard to imagine that some of these tall tales about Parsons kind of might have trickled down to Bradbury over the years. The culmination of the Babylon working occurred on February 28th, 1946, and exactly 7 years later, so February 28th, 1953, Jack Arnold, the director, shoots the scene in It Came from Outer Space where John Putnam, JP, the outsider scientist, when he comes face to face with an alien being for the first time in the middle of the desert. So it's like the freak waves that Parsons and Hubbard unleashed during the Babylon working just kept rolling forward through time and space, creating all these bizarre synchronicities along the way. So my theory in the chapter is that Bradbury created John Putnam as an amalgam of John Parsons and George Adamski, amateur astronomer, claiming that he met an alien in the desert as well. And Bradbury's best friend is Ray Harryhausen, who did the special effects for Earth versus the Flying Saucers and so many other films. Harryhausen was so interested in Adamski that he actually drove up to San Diego to meet Adamski in person. And Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen had been friends since like high school. So he was out there
Mount Palomar.
Mount Palomar, which, by the way, as I mentioned, I mentioned in an endnote in Hollywood Haunts the World, quoting Stalking the Great Whore, that according to James Shelby Downard, Parsons and Wilfred T. Smith were taking treks up to Mount Palomar and doing rituals up there. So there you have this geographical connection between Adamski and Parsons.
It's probably true,
There could definitely be some truth to that. And in Twin Peaks, you have Parsons then kind of appears metaphorically in Twin Peaks as well, definitely in season 3, where in the last episode, you see Lynch recreating the Babylon working in many different ways. Diane has a hairstyle that looks exactly like the paintings, the self-portraits that Marjorie Cameron did. And by the way, Marjorie Cameron is often talked about as a kind of like appendage to Parsons or Hubbard, but she was an accomplished artist. I attended
I actually find her more interesting than Parsons.
In many ways, because since she lived longer,
Right.
she had a greater impact. Also an impact on cinema in the sense that she actually appeared in inauguration of the
Right.
inauguration of the Pleasure Dome.
She's only 24 when she meets Parsons, and she lives
Right.
into the 90s.
And so, yeah, she's in Kenneth Anger's inauguration of the Pleasure Dome. She's in Curtis Harrington's Night Tide with Dennis Hopper, who would later work with Lynch in Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
And I attended
also, yeah, go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
Back in I think 2013, in LA, they had an art exhibit where they featured Marjorie Cameron's paintings, and they also were showing on a loop some of the films, the Kenneth Anger films that she was in, and displayed under a glass. They had some other adjacent ephemera connected to her, and so under a glass case, they had Wilford T. Smith's ceremonial sword. Which tripped me out because I had actually written a story called A Babe of the Abyss that I workshopped at the Clarion Writers Workshop in Washington in 1996. And the two main characters of the story were Parsons and Hubbard. And Wilford T. Smith's ceremonial sword appeared in the story. And I sold it upon first submission to an anthology that was to be called The Name of the Beast. And it was going to be published by Creation Books, who had done a Lovecraft anthology the year before. And the anthology was going to have a play by Grant Morrison and a story by Alan Moore and other writers, all connected to Aleister Crowley. And I submitted it right after Clarion, and the editor, D.M. Mitchell, who was the publisher and editor of Creation Books in England, he wrote me back. He goes, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to put this in the anthology." He goes, "I am a little worried about solicitors, lawyers hired by Scientology, but what the hell? We'll just go forward with it." And then mysteriously, I never heard from him again, and the book was never published. And Creation Books just disappeared. So I don't exactly know what happened there. But the story I wrote has never been published. I should probably pull it out and look at it again. But so anyway, it was weird seeing that sword in physical form at this Marjorie Cameron exhibit. But her paintings are very impressive when you see them all exhibited together at the same time. And it's interesting. I found out that she used to hang out at a cafe in Malibu in the 60s called Cafe Frankenstein, I believe was the name of it. And also who hung out there in the 60s was Richard Matheson, Ray Bradbury, William F. Nolan, George Clayton Johnson, Charles Beaumont, all of whom worked for Twilight Zone. And they would go to Malibu to this kind of beatnik Cafe Frankenstein, and hang out there. And simultaneously, Marjorie Cameron was there hanging out at the same time. And I'm just like, did they ever meet each other?
Cool.
I mean, did they ever cross paths?
She also, one of the things that I found out, and this is in Go Rightly and Adam Go Rightly and Greg Bishop's book, on the alien contactees, she's in it. And the reason that they put her in it is because she would go to Van Tassel's gatherings out there at Giant Rock. So she was a mainstay, and she was interested in the contactee movement, which I find fascinating.
Right. Well, and I mentioned
it makes you wonder if Parsons, had he lived a little longer, maybe if he would have been just as interested.
It's interesting to consider that if Parsons had lived a normal lifespan, he would have been, I think, 90 years old in 2004. So,
because he wasn't that old when he died. He was only I don't think what was he in his 30s. So he wasn't very old. Right.
So I just told you about this guy. I went to his 100th birthday party. He lived to 101. So conceivably Parsons could have lived to 2015. And it's really hard to wrap your head around what would what would he have been doing in 2001?
Right.
It's impossible to know. But or I even think about that in terms of other, like H.P. Lovecraft. If he led a normal lifespan, he would have been alive during the Vietnam War. Like what would Lovecraft's fiction look like during the Vietnam War?
That's true.
I mean,
That's true.
You can't even imagine that. But so if you read The Secret History of Twin Peaks by Mark Frost, Jack Parsons actually explicitly appears as a character in the book, and he even connects him to the magician longs to see, the scrap of poetry that the one-armed man recites in the dream episode, I think episode 3 of season 1, where Cooper first has the dream.
It's like Lynch was always so enigmatic about the stuff, like, what were you actually talking about? And I think sometimes with Lynch, there was a lot of that where he just inserted random things in that he liked to put in. But you got to wonder, like, he had to have been influenced by guys like Kenneth Anger and
that scene. I think Frost too, especially for Frost for Twin Peaks is one of the big influences in some of these threads we're talking about.
I understand that at some point there was kind of a rift between Frost and Lynch, because I think Frost resented the fact that Lynch was getting all the attention when Frost had a lot to do with the success of it, and of course Lynch, they collaborate on the pilot. Lynch directs it. They both co-wrote it. They co-write the first episode. I think Tim Hunter directs the first episode. At this point, Lynch, he has an art exhibit going on in Japan, and he has to begin filming Wild at Heart. So they actually delay the filming of episode 3 with the dream sequence where Cooper first goes into the Red Room. They know that Lynch wants to direct that episode, so they skip that episode. They filmed everything all in a row. So they leave that episode to the end because Lynch is busy filming Wild at Heart. When that shuts down, he comes back and they film episode 3, which I think explains the odd continuity, not exactly an error, but he has the dream, and then the next episode picks up and Cooper's there and he says, I had this dream, and he says to Lucy and Andy, he says, you were there. You were both in the dream. But of course, if you watch it, they're not there in the dream. And I wonder if the vision kind of changed by the time Lynch actually directed it. And so some elements changed, because that episode was filmed last. And so, in other words, Frost is kind of is shouldering the load through most of season 1, but it's Lynch that ends up on like Time magazine and stuff like that. Apparently there was some kind of, and there's a certain point during season 2 where Lynch and Frost kind of separate themselves from the series a little bit. And I according to an interview I read with Robert Engels, who was the staff writer, they would continue to send like these short synopses, bullet points, this, and should happen. But it's not until the very end, when the ratings are kind of tanking, that Frost and Lynch come back, and you can tell when that is, because it's the episode where Cole comes back as a physical character, and the Wyndham Earle story kind of really starts to ignite. And so if you read Frost's work aside from Twin Peaks, like he wrote a novel called List of Seven, which I think ties in with like Jack the Ripper and occult symbolism. Like all that stuff is in Frost's work aside from Lynch. So it's obvious that Frost has an interest in these things as well. And it's not like, like I did an episode of Where Did the Road Go, where I was talking about the esoteric symbolism in Jack Kirby's work. And, if you look at Stan Lee and Jack Kirby as separate entities, and you look at what Stan Lee did separate from Jack Kirby, that symbolism's not there. So we can assume that that's coming from Kirby, but with Frost and Lynch, it's like there seems to be a equal interest in that kind of subject matter, stuff, even when they're working separately. Did you know Mark Frost ghost wrote Clive Barker's Nightbreed?
No.
No.
So it's based on Clive Barker's novel Cabal, and Mark Frost. I guess Clive Barker didn't have time to adapt it himself because he was directing the film, and Mark Frost ghost wrote. He adapted Cabal, though in the film it says written and directed by Clive Barker. But I just thought that was fascinating that would have been the same time as Twin Peaks, relatively, that Clive Barker must have approached Frost because of Twin Peaks and thought this is the guy who can do this. I was recently watching it was late at night, and an old episode of $6 Million Man comes on, and on the credits, teleplay, Mark Frost. And I thought, wait a minute, is this the same Mark Frost? So I looked it up. Indeed, it was the same Mark Frost. It's like one of his first TV writing credits is $6 Million Man. And I thought that's interesting because in $6 Million Man, you've got UFOs, you got Bigfoot, you got organic robotoids, doppelgangers.
Yeah. No, it's all there. Yeah.
Was he attracted to the series because of that, or was it just a coincidence? It's also interesting in that Steve Austin, the $6 Million Man, the character grows up in Ojai, and that's where Mark Frost lives now. And there are certain episodes that were shot in Ojai, so I wondered if that's where Mark Frost became interested in Ojai. So you see Hubbard and Parsons as characters in The Secret History of Twin Peaks. You see him explicitly integrated into season 3 of Twin Peaks, and then of course after that, so you've seen him metaphorically in It Came from Outer Space. You see him metaphorically in these science fiction novels I've mentioned. You see him metaphorically in Twin Peaks. And then eventually, after Twin Peaks season 3, you have Strange Angel, which is just a straight adaptation of the biography. And so you have the story of Jack Parsons just done as a semi biographical story. And so just like as I was talking before with Inherit the Wind, there's that pattern of eventually the taboo, it's not quite taboo anymore. So you can actually you don't need to disguise it in metaphor. You can just talk about it nakedly, openly. And
yeah.
And I by the way, I mentioned before about the occult casting theory that Robert Sullivan has. It's just interesting that the actor who plays Jack Parsons also plays the character in Ari Aster's Midsummer, who dies in a similar way as Parsons. So it's like, is that a coincidence, or was it done on purpose? Was he cast in that role on because of the connection to Parsons? I don't know, but it is interesting synchronicity.
Well, I kind of just we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Like, we told you to kind of put a pin in on the whole Black Dahlia thing. Have you heard about this? Like that this is like a thing that they think that the same guy was who killed the Black Dahlia, that Elizabeth Smart, that he was the Zodiac killer. Have you heard this? That this is something that new that's come out in like the last couple of months.
Well, actually, Steve Hodel wrote a book called Most Evil.
Correct. But it's not the same guy. It's not. Yeah, Steve Hodel thinks it was his father.
Who is this other suspect?
So there was a guy that was suspected by the police at the time. His name was Mark Margolis. He was in, I think, his like mid to late 20s at the time. He'd been a Marine. And she had lived briefly with him. He was like her boyfriend. And at the time she was right before she died, she was telling people that she was afraid of the boyfriend that used to be a Marine. And so the police he was on the suspect list, and I guess that they couldn't directly tie him to the murder, but he was also a medical student at the time. So the speculation is that he had some idea that this was that he could have cut her into 2 pieces, right? That he had the skill to do that in the way that he left the body. And later on, this guy he used AI. This guy used AI to like go through like the ciphers, the Zodiac ciphers. And it's very complicated the way that the guy explains it. It's not quite simple, because it's just this big process of elimination in writing and context and matching up handwriting. But the long story short of that is that eventually this guy's name was Mark Margolis, and he connects this Mark Margolis guy to the Zodiac killings too. And then
very interesting.
Then he talks to Mark Margolis' son, who has a picture in the attic that is a picture of a woman from the waist up only, who looks like she's dead. It says Elizabeth at the top. This is something that Mark Margolis' son had, that Mark Margolis drew, that is signed Zodiac. It's fucking crazy.
That's fascinating. I remember when I read Black Dahlia Avenger, I was very fascinated by that, and it seems overall credible.
Yeah. When I first heard this, I thought of Steve Hodel too, because he's the only other person that has linked the Black Dahlia and the Zodiac killer together, but it's not the same person that he says it was.
Right, and there are interesting parallels in the sense of writing letters to the police, the newspaper, the codes, and all that. Right. I always, when I read Most Evil, I found Most Evil to be somewhat less compelling than Black Dahlia Avenger, in the sense that I was trying to imagine how old George Hodel would have been when the Zodiac killings were happening. And I guess it depends on what kind of shape he was in.
This Margolis guy would have probably been in his 40s. So he could, he could have easily, because he was in his mid 20s, I think, when he was suspected of killing Elizabeth Smart.
I see.
And so, this is only this is 47. The first Zodiac killing is like 67.
Right.
So we're talking 20 years. I mean, he could have been in his mid 40s.
Right. Right.
I have a suspicion. I've always had a real suspicion about the Zodiac that it was more than one person.
That was exactly my problem with Most Evil, is that even though Hodel's theory kind of answers some questions, it doesn't answer all of them, and that's the big question. I mean, recently, like Netflix did a documentary about the Zodiac, claiming it was this one guy, and every time they try to pin it on one guy, it seems to me that there's a lot of questions that are unanswered there. It seems clear to me that it wasn't just one person.
Right. It was probably somebody that, if it was one, if it was one person, it was someone that really went under the radar. And like, if they're tying it's fascinating that they're tying both cases in. Like, they've arrived to the same conclusion that Steve Hodel arrived at, but it's a different suspect.
That's interesting. Is this an article that's online, or?
There's articles about it online, because this guy who did this research used AI to look at all these patterns. I think that he got together with a reporter, and the reporter wrote it up. And the thing is too, like, they show the picture. It's not that just like, we've seen the picture and we can tell you what's in it. They actually have the picture that this Mark Margolis guy drew.
That's very fascinating. Have you ever seen a film from the 1930s called Charlie Chan on Treasure Island?
No.
It's a Charlie Chan movie, and Treasure Island is the treasure island in San Francisco. So it takes place in San Francisco, and it's about a killer named the Zodiac Killer, played by Cesar Romero. Okay. And then, of course, later on, Cesar Romero plays the Joker in Batman, and there's a two-part episode where the Joker is killing people based on the Zodiac. It's a really weird, level, synchromistic levels of coincidence and synchronicity. But the film is worth watching. Again, you don't know if the person or people responsible for the Zodiac killings, were they film fans? There's the whole
you
thing.
have to you have to wonder, because there is the most dangerous game aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, it could have been. I mean, and the thing is too, like there were other murders that in Southern California that were similar to the Zodiac murders too in the 60s.
That's the other type of the film-based conspiracy theory is the predictive programming angle. It's not necessarily a cult, but it's like this mind control kind of angle.
Yeah, and again,
it's art. Yeah, I'll give you one example of that, like one good example of that, just how art imitates life and life imitates art. Like with my little deep dive into the Warrens, like with the Smurl haunting. Okay, like I found a picture of Jason Miller, who was from that area, or he might have even been from the town that took place in, who played Father Karras in The Exorcist. He has a picture of him in front of the house. So it's like this weird, it's like it's life imitating art imitating life. It's crazy.
Right. And then it's the Zodiac thing kind of similar to what we were saying earlier, that they don't stop to consider, rather than predictive programming, that it could be that the killer or killers saw the film and was inspired by the film, as opposed to the film, like back in the 1940s, somebody made the film thinking, haha, in 20 years, we're going to initiate the Zodiac program and really freak people out.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Did I tell you about, I don't know if I ever told you this. When I first read Black Dahlia Adventure, it said by Steve Hodel. Well, I grew up listening to a radio show in Southern California called Mike Hodell's Hour 25, and he would interview various science fiction writers every Friday night from 10 to midnight. It had been on for years. And then Mike Hodell died of brain cancer in the 1980s, and Harlan Ellison, science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, took over for Mike Hodell because they were friends. And so Harlan Ellison started hosting Hour 25, but it was still called Mike Hodell's Hour 25. So when Black Dahlia Adventure came out, which I think it was 2003, it was by Steve Hodel. I didn't make any connection between the two names, but as I'm reading it, he mentions that he has a younger brother named Mike. Then he mentions he grew up later and got into radio, and I was like, wait a minute. I look in the index, I skip forward, and I realized that Mike Hodell this is the same Mike Hodell. Mike Hodell is Steve's younger brother. And later on, not long ago, just a couple of years ago, J. Michael Straczynski, who created Babylon 5, and I quote him in Hollywood Haunts the World, he was the host that took over after Harlan Ellison. So he hosted the show Hour 25. Straczynski posted recently a story about how he and Mike were at a science fiction convention in the early 80s, and they were having breakfast. And for some reason, Straczynski just starts talking about the Black Dahlia. And Mike Hodell, just out of the blue, goes, yeah, my brother and I always thought that our father was the Black Dahlia killer. And then Straczynski was like, wait, what? And then somebody comes over and distracts him, and that's the end of the conversation. And then years later, Steve Hodel comes out with the book. But I thought that was interesting because in the book, Steve Hodel frames it like a literary detective story where his father dies. He finds in his effects these photographs of these various women. And among them is a photograph of who he says might be Elizabeth.
Right, I've seen the photograph. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
and I never thought that the photograph looked like her. To me, it doesn't look like Elizabeth. So Hodel frames it as this is the first time the idea appeared in his head that his father might be the Black Dahlia killer. But if this story that Straczynski's telling is true, Mike in the early 80s tells him casually, oh yeah, my brother and I always thought that my father was the Black Dahlia killer.
They might have suspected it. One interesting thing about this Mark Margolis guy was that, Steve Hodel talks about his dad, about how he was into Man Ray, the surrealist photographer.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Mark Margolis was too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's very fascinating. That book, Black Dahlia Avenger, actually saved my life one time in a very roundabout way. This would have been like early 2005, and I was reading the book at the time, and I was teaching at El Camino Community College, where I had been a student at one time, and I'm teaching these 3 literature classes, and it's the first time I ever taught on that campus, and they had an evaluator come in, another professor sit in on my class to see how I'm doing, and his job was to write up a report, and then he sends me this like little thing that we became friendly, me and this guy, and he sends me this thing and I'm supposed to fill out, self-evaluating, like evaluating myself. And so I told him, I go, is this like something that everybody's going to see, or is this just you? And he goes, oh, I'm the only one who sees it. I go, oh, okay. So I wrote this kind of like, as a joke, this like overblown, evaluation of myself. Is like, this is like the most amazing instructor who's ever taught at a Southern California campus, and the it was just a joke intended for the instructor. Well, I turn it in, and I thought he was going to get a chuckle out of it, and then like a few days later, I get this email from the temporary chair of the English department at El Camino saying, "How dare you? I've never read anything more offensive or insulting than this self-evaluation. You better come in here, Buster, and I'm going to give you a word or two." And I call the guy. I go, "Hey, didn't you say that you were the only one who was going to see this?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know that other people were going to see it." And so I go in. I have to go into her office, and she's going to like, she's going to ream me a new asshole over this thing that I wrote. And I walk in, and I happen to have the Black Dahlia Avenger in my hand. And I come into her office. I sit down. I'm ready to get lectured to. And she goes, "Are you reading the Black Dahlia Avenger?" I go, "Yes, I've been reading it for the past few weeks." I go, "I used to grow up listening to this radio show." I tell her everything I just told you. And then she goes, "That's fascinating." And then she like turns around, and on her bookshelf are like 24 other serial killer books. And she's like, "Yes, I'm very interested in the Black Dahlia as well. I'm reading this one now." And she pulls out this book that claimed that Orson Welles was the Black Dahlia Avenger. And you could figure it out by seeing Lady from Shanghai, and there were clues in there. And I go, "Well, that's interesting, because Orson Welles was friends with John Huston, and John Huston was friends with George Hodel." And she goes, "Oh, that's fascinating." And then we're talking for about an hour about serial killers. And then she goes, "Oh, why did you come in?" I go, "Well, I wrote that self-evaluation." I go, "Look, it was just a joke." And she goes, "Oh, forget about it. I'll just take it out of your file. Anyway, here, borrow this Orson Welles book. Yeah, you're going to be really fascinated by it." I go, "Thank you." And so, thanks to the Black Dahlia killer, I was not reprimanded.
Before we go, you had mentioned that you had gotten an autograph signed by someone.
Oh, Crispin Glover.
Crispin Glover. Yeah.
Okay, so December 2007. It's Christmas time. My wife is pregnant. She's about, my daughter Olivia will be born January 15th, probably about 3 weeks after this incident. At the Egyptian Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, they're playing Crispin Glover's film, What Is It? ?
Oh, man,
And Crispin Glover is going to be there talking about the film in person. So right before we go to the Egyptian Theater, a few blocks down is the huge Church of Scientology building. And so we're just walking along, killing time before it's time to see the movie. My wife and I walk by the Scientology building, and there's this big Winter Wonderland display. And it says like, "Winter Wonderland, come see Santa." And I realized that I was like, "Oh my, this is a Scientology Santa." Like this whole thing, it was like a trap to lure kids in, and you would sit on Scientology Santa's lap. And instead of giving
that's,
you like,
that's how the Church of Scientology operates. It's just a trap. It's just, that's just how they operate.
Instead of giving you like a candy cane, they would give you a piece of Scientology literature.
Nice.
So I said to my wife, I go, we got to wait in line. I got to get a photo of sitting on Scientology Santa's lap. And so we wait in line, and I go up and I sit on Scientology Santa's lap. He asked me what I want, and I said, what I really want, I don't want those like little thin Scientology flyers. And there's a box of Scientology hardcovers, and there's one, it's like a big thick book by L. Ron Hubbard, and I can't remember what the title is. And I go, can I have one of those books instead of these like little thin flyers? And he's, okay. And he hands me this big 600-page Scientology hardcover. I go, thank you, Santa. And I walk off with my prize. We go to the Egyptian Theater. We see the movie. Afterwards, Crispin Glover has a autograph signing. He's signing his books, like he had Ratcatcher, like those weird books that he puts out. So I bought a copy of Ratcatcher, and I'm waiting in line, and I go up to him, and I put down Ratcatcher, and then I set down the Scientology book next to it. He signs Ratcatcher, and I tell him, I go, you were the best thing about Beowulf. The Robert Zemeckis Beowulf. I go, you were the best thing in it. For some reason, he interpreted that as me saying it wasn't a good film, because he goes, oh, I rather liked it. And he told me that he liked it because it wasn't a typical Hollywood, like black and white, good versus evil, that the character who appears to be a hero eventually turns out to be somewhat corrupt. And he thought it was interesting for that reason. And I was like, well, I'm not saying it's a bad film. I was just saying that I thought you were the best thing about it, So as he's talking to me, he reaches out for the Scientology book, and he looks at it. He opens it. He clearly sees that's a Scientology book. He opens it up and he signs it. Crispin Glover, Merry Christmas, and he hands it to me. So I go, thank you, and I walked off merrily into the night with this wonderful Christmas present of having an L. Ron Hubbard book signed to me by Crispin Glover.
Nice. So it wasn't Dianetics. It was another book.
It was not Dianetics. It was called like What is Scientology or something like that.
Oh, okay.
What is it?
Yeah. What is it? What is Scientology?
Well, Robert, I want to thank you for coming on, man. It's been great talking to you. I always enjoy talking to you. We've been going.
I know you were talking about this for years too. I'm glad to finally read it, and I'm glad it's finally out.
Glad to finally read it and everything. Where is the book available, and like so what's next for you and your
order it. You can order it directly from headpress.com, which is the publisher, and you can get it from Amazon as well. In fact, all of my books are on Amazon, except maybe Spies and Saucers, I think, is out of print. You might have a hard time locating that. I really want to reprint that particular book. I think all the other books are on Amazon. I have my first comic book is coming out, The Upside Down Magician #1, which is drawn by an artist named Nadim, who's in Canada. And it's a comic book about paintings, sentient houses, Hieronymus Bosch, government agents, secret societies, and many other things that we can't yet understand. But it will be available sometime soon.
Sounds like you're revealing the method.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm working on a nonfiction book called Imaginauts, which I've been working on for some time. And I'm working on a novel at the moment. And that's what I'm working on.
Well, you are prolific, sir.
And the Spanish translation of Camilio was just published. So people in Spain are being introduced to Camilio for the first time. It was published there this past summer under the name Paranoia, which I thought was interesting because they were trying to figure out how to translate the title into Spanish. So they chose the name Paranoia, which connects back to the very first magazine I ever published in was Paranoia Magazine. So I thought that was appropriate. So it'll be interesting to see how it does in Spain. And I would really love to see it translated into, French and German and every other possible language.
It's a classic.
Yeah, if you have an interest in reading Camilio in Spanish, you can now do that. And oh, by the way, I listened to your interview with Dr. Future, your most recent episode before this one, I think. And he mentioned that there's going to be some sort of new investigative report on the Georgia Guidestones. So I'm very much interested.
Yeah, there's been an article already, and there's supposed to be a podcast that's supposed to come out through the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which Mike has been interviewed about. Yep.
I'm very interested in listening to that when that debuts.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, I think it's going to be sometime in the next couple of months. So.
Oh, good. Because again, it's like one of those things that it just goes down the memory hole and everyone forgets that it even happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's been what? I mean, it was like what, 2023 that happened? I mean, it's been nearly 3 years. So it's been about 2.5 years at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, I want to thank you for coming on. I think we're going to also sign off here.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on, and I'm glad that Conspirinormal is up and running again.
Thank you. And people can get in touch with you through Cryptoscatology. And
yes, cryptoschatology@gmail.com. You can email me there.
Oh, perfect. Nice. All right.
Or through Facebook as well.
Guys, we're Conspirinormal. Stay tuned for more shows. It's at the moment, that's all I can say. And we still have a Patreon if you want to support us there, although we're not very active on there anymore. But so thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back next time on Conspirinormal.